When the Ukrainian military first received FV103 Spartan armored personnel carriers, in July 2022, it wasn't a shot heard around the world. In fact, most military analysts agreed that the vehicles likely wouldn't have much of an impact on the battlefield. After all, even then, they were far from modern infantry fighting vehicles. With Britain itself retiring them more than 15 years ago, Ukraine became the 7th country to use the vehicle, with Latvia being the only other European country to still have them. Compared to Russian modern military equipment, the Spartans looked paltry and inadequate. And yet 3.5 years into the war, the number of Spartans on the battlefield grew from 35 to close to 200, and out of that number, only approximately 35 have been lost. According to the open-source intelligence monitoring company Oryx, the survival rate of about 82.5% is on par with some of the most successful Western and Ukrainian systems, suggesting that these humble vehicles are much more than meets the eye. So let's examine exactly how Ukraine turned vehicles, meant for the UK's junkyards, into frontline monsters that could tangle with Russia's advanced tanks. Now let's begin with the actual specs, what they represent and why they made the Spartans nearly obsolete in the first place. The FV103 Spartan was developed in the 1970s as part of Britain's combat vehicle, reconnaissance tracked or CBRT family. The design philosophy was simple: create a fast vehicle that could transport specialist teams, such as anti-aircraft crews or reconnaissance units, across the battlefield while keeping pace with heavier tanks. To achieve this, British engineers went all in on trying to shed as much weight from a traditional infantry carrier as possible. The hull was constructed from welded aluminum alloy instead of steel, maxing out at just 60 millimeters thick on the frontal arc. This provided protection against 14.5 millimeter rounds from around 200 meters and shrapnel. But nothing more. A direct hit from any modern anti-tank weapon would punch straight through. The vehicle's 195 horsepower Jaguar engine could push it to 60 miles per hour on an open road, and only when carrying minimal loads. The flip side is that the weight-to-power ratio meant it could climb a 60-degree incline. The squad compartment held just 4 soldiers, not including the 3 crew members, which could be accessed through a rear door or roof hatches. The vehicle's armament consisted of a single 64mm L-37A1 machine gun. In a commander's cupola, this was enough for self-defense against infantry, but ultimately useless against armored targets. Even another Spartan, the combination of lackluster armor and having only niche operational capabilities, ultimately meant that the Spartan was never really used in actual combat, instead serving as auxiliary transport for the UK military. Even then, the steady improvements in armaments of traditional infantry fighting vehicles meant that the tank was rapidly approaching the point where it would get shot down by similar auxiliary vehicles, this LED to the UK replacing the Spartan with the more capable Panther command and liaison vehicles. The last Spartans in British service were withdrawn by 2009 for context. Compare the Spartan to Ukraine's existing Soviet-era equipment and Western alternatives. The BTR-3 Ukraine standard domestically produced APC weighs 16.4 tons and carries 3 to 6 troops. While being armed with a 30mm autocannon, the American M113, which Ukraine also operates, weighs 14 tons and transports 11 soldiers. The M2 Bradley that Ukraine desperately wanted weighs 27 tons, carries 6 troops plus crew, and mounts a 25mm autocannon, plus tow or tube launch optically tracked. Wire-guided anti-tank missiles was sophisticated. These benchmarks, the Spartan looks pathetic. Yet when the UK pledged to send 35 Spartans in 2022, and then increased that pledge to over 120, Ukraine accepted gratefully when the Sergei Prytula Charity Foundation crowdfunded $6.5 million in just 36 hours to purchase 60 additional Spartans. From UK private sellers in November 2022, Ukrainian soldiers celebrated when the Ukrainian World Congress acquired 13 more through the Unite with Ukraine initiative. Frontline units competed for them. The cheering was due to Ukrainian forces seeing something Western analysts missed. In a war dominated by drones, artillery, and constant observation, the Spartans' apparent weaknesses were actually hidden strengths. Ukrainian crews didn't even bother trying to use the Spartan as a frontline infantry fighting vehicle. That would have been suicide. Instead, they transformed it into a high-speed armored taxi, optimized for rapid insertion and extraction missions. Under the most dangerous conditions, one Ukrainian soldier explained the operational concept as move in unnoticed. Complete the task unnoticed. Drop off the assault team unnoticed. Get in, get our guys out. This was radically different from NATO's doctrine of mechanized warfare. When the vehicle was originally designed where infantry fighting vehicles advance alongside tanks while suppressing enemy positions with autocannons. A typical Spartan mission in Ukrainian service works like this. The vehicle waits, concealed in a tree line or behind terrain, with its engine off to minimize its thermal and electromagnetic signature. Ukrainian FPV drones scout the route ahead, identifying Russian observation posts, artillery positions, and drone operators. When the mission commander determines the window is clear, the Spartan's crew fires up the engine and accelerates rapidly across open terrain. The goal is speed and surprise. At 60 miles an hour, the vehicle can cover roughly a mile a minute, drastically reducing the time window for Russian forces to spot it, transmit targeting data, and launch counterattacks. The compact size that seemed like a weakness became an advantage. The Spartan is one of the narrowest and shortest vehicles in its class, with a length of under 17 feet and a width of 8 feet. 2 inches, meaning it can hide in positions that would expose larger vehicles, like the BTR-3 or Bradley. Its low silhouette at slightly under 9 feet tall makes it harder for Russian drones to acquire and track, especially when moving fast across complex terrain. When Ukrainian forces needed to evacuate wounded soldiers from exposed positions near Bakhmut, Spartans proved invaluable. Due to the relatively low benchmark capacity, Ukrainians would often need to be crammed into the transport quarters. Depending on the severity of their injuries, some evacuation runs became legendary. Among Ukrainian units, fitting more than a dozen soldiers, one crew member reported that on the way back, there's no gear inside, so you pack them in like Tetris. This far exceeds the Spartan's designed capacity of 7 total personnel, but in emergency evacuations, Ukrainian crews prioritize saving lives over following specifications. The vehicle's lightweight also provides a crucial advantage that Western analysts consistently underestimated ground pressure. At just 10.6 tons, distributed across its track surface area, the Spartan exerts roughly 0.4 kilograms per centimeter square of ground pressure. Compare this to a main battle tank, like the T-72 at 46 tons, creating approximately 0.9 kilograms per centimeter square, or the Leopard 2 at over 60 tons, generating even higher pressure. This difference matters enormously in eastern Ukraine's notorious black soil, which turns into thick mud during spring thaw, and after heavy rains, heavier vehicles bog down, becoming vulnerable targets for artillery and drones. The Spartan's low ground pressure allows it to traverse terrain that would immobilize heavier armor, opening tactical options that didn't exist for units equipped with BTR-3s or Bradleys, in fact. Some reports would suggest that a soldier jumping off the vehicle could get stuck in the MUD, where the Spartan previously passed through, without an issue. Even more remarkably, the lightweight may provide some protection against anti-tank mines. Most pressure-activated anti-tank mines are designed to trigger at weights of 150 to 300 kilo, sufficient to ensure they detonate under track vehicles, but don't waste themselves on lighter treads. The Spartan falls into a gray zone, but some mines might not trigger consistently, especially older Soviet models that Ukraine and Russia have both laid extensively. While this isn't guaranteed protection, it could create survivability margins that simply don't exist for heavier armor. Of course, the Spartan replacements included major armor improvements to make them less vulnerable upon detonating a mine or getting shot from a larger caliber. So it's unclear how effective they were at dodging mines. But Ukraine realized quite early that some technical specifications of vehicles simply ceased to matter in the grand scheme of the war. The invasion quickly turned into a slug, where neither side could advance reasonably. This led to the absolute dominance of unmanned systems. Both sides deployed tens of thousands of drones monthly, from simple commercial quadcopters dropping grenades to sophisticated FPV racing drones, retrofitted with anti-tank warheads, to long-range loitering munitions, like the Russian Lancet and Ukrainian modified systems. Traditional tank doctrine assumed that heavy armor and active protection systems would provide survivability, but drones attack from above, hitting the thinnest armor on any vehicle's roof. They also strike in swarms that overwhelm active protection systems, like autocannons, or even passive add-ons such as netting. And even swarms of drones can cost orders of magnitude less than the vehicles they destroy. In this environment, the Spartan's lack of heavy armor became paradoxically advantageous because it was never designed to survive. Heavy anti-tank weapons. Ukrainian engineers were free to optimize it entirely for drone defense without worrying about maintaining a balance between protection types. In a video from late July 2025, you can clearly see Ukrainian Spartans being fitted with a similar anti-drone netting used for main battle tanks and other IFs. And in much the same way, the metal wire net is then covered with camouflage, canvas or similar material to allow for the aforementioned lion weight tactic before the vehicles were needed for transport in the first place. Alternatively, some vehicles were retrofitted to serve as an auxiliary combat equipment rather than transport. This was done by attaching a turret that holds an M2, Browning heavy machine gun, and an automatic grenade launcher, instead of the stock autocannon. While this precluded the vehicle from receiving the anti-drone measures, it drastically increased its offensive potential. But pure technical specifications alone don't fully explain why Spartans had so much success in Ukraine while they originally headed for the junkyard. In actuality, the vehicles were simply outcompeted by newer designs when serving in their native NATO militaries, but Ukraine's practical requirements allow a sort of reset on those favored old designs. When Britain retired the Spartan fleet in 2009, it replaced them with and provides Stanig Level 2 ballistic protection. It's faster on roads, more fuel efficient, easier to maintain, and significantly more comfortable than the tracked Spartan. For NATO operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, this made perfect sense. Coalition forces operated with overwhelming air superiority, sophisticated ISR intelligence surveillance, reconnaissance networks, and logistical chains that could deliver parts anywhere within 48 hours. In that environment, wheeled vehicles with lower operating costs and better road performance were ideal. But Ukraine doesn't fight for air superiority. It operates in a near-peer conflict, where both sides have extensive artillery drone swarms and electronic warfare capabilities. Roads are heavily surveilled and frequently mined or struck with artillery or drones. At the same time, supply chains are contested and unreliable on both sides due to the overwhelming amount of long-range drone attacks happening daily across the 600-mile front. In this environment, the obsolete Spartan's track, mobility, compact size, and simple mechanics made it more valuable than newer, more sophisticated